A dead calm. The sun is melting the deck. There is nothing in the men's eyes but hunger. Just yesterday they were brothers. Today they look at each other like meat. The dice clatter on the wood. The lot is cast. The cabin boy slowly raises his head. He has just realized his life is over. He will be their salvation. But to understand how pirates reach this point, we must first shatter the greatest myth about their lives, the myth of the endless feast. This is not fiction. In 1765, the sloop Peggy was caught in a dead calm. When the food ran out, Captain David Harrison and his crew cast lots. They ate a black slave who was on board. This brings us to three questions. What did pirates really eat when they weren't plundering ships? What disgusting things were on their emergency menu even before they considered their fellow men? And was there an unwritten code, known among all sailors as the custom of the sea, that decided who would become dinner? We will answer all three. The Hollywood image of a pirate feast is a lie. Forget roasted hams and wine. The foundation of their diet was far more mundane. Salt beef, salted meat dried to the hardness of a rock, often already riddled with worms. And hardtack, flour and water baked into bricks to prevent mold. This wasn't food for pleasure, it was fuel for survival. The sea biscuit was so hard that sailors called it a toothbreaker. Eating it was like chewing on a ceramic tile. It had to be smashed with a knife handle and soaked in grog for an hour just to be chewable. But hardness wasn't the main problem. The biscuits were infested with weevils and their larvae. That's why pirates often ate in the dark, so they couldn't see what was going into their mouths. Sailors even had a grim joke: it's better to eat a weevil than to eat nothing at all. Experienced sailors would knock the biscuit on the table before eating, trying to shake out at least some of the insects. Those that remained were cynically called a meat supplement to their meager diet. But even worms in the biscuits were a lesser problem. The real treasure on board, and the main killer, was fresh water. The wooden barrels used to store it were less like containers and more like incubators. After a couple of weeks in the tropics, the water turned into a thick green soup of algae and mosquito larvae. It was a floating petri dish, spreading dysentery and typhoid faster than any cannonball. This is why rum was not a drink for celebration, but a utilitarian tool. It was added to the spoiled water to kill some of the bacteria and mask the foul taste. This practice was introduced by the British Admiral Edward Vernon in 1740. Pirates did the same out of sheer necessity. Rum was not an ingredient for a cocktail. It was a chemical weapon against their own water. It was a daily choice between a quick death from bacteria and a slow one from dehydration. Imagine for a second, you have two choices: a mug of green, foul-smelling water that could kill you, or the same water with rum, which slowly dehydrates you but makes it bearable. Your answer to this choice is the first step into the logic of pirate survival. And remember, there is no doctor or first aid kit on board. Dysentery is not just an upset stomach. It's a sentence to a slow and agonizing death over several days. Now your choice becomes even sharper. When the water became poison, the last hope was the salt beef. But it too would fail. The meat barrels were literally writhing with maggots. Sailors called such salt beef mahogany for its hardness and color. When it spoiled, the brine in the barrel turned into a gray, stinking sludge. Trying to boil such meat for hours was an act of desperation. It was a way to convince yourself that you were still eating food, not the decaying corpse of an animal. And then, the last biscuit is eaten. The last drop of filthy water is drunk. The crew stares at the empty barrels. Hunger becomes a physical pain, but they are not yet ready to look at each other. Their eyes begin to search the ship for things never considered food. The hunt begins, for the ship itself. At this moment, the ship ceases to be a home and a means of transport. It becomes a prison, and the prisoners of this jail, pushed to the brink, begin to eat the bars of their own cage. The first targets are not the bars, but other prisoners, the ship's rats. Any source of protein that moves becomes prey. The hunt is on with knives and clubs in the dark corners of the hold. This is no longer a matter of squeamishness, it is pure instinct. On a starving ship, the price of a single rat could skyrocket to the equivalent of a sailor's weekly wage. Paradoxically, the presence of rats was considered a good sign. It meant they still had something to eat. The real horror began when even the rats disappeared. It was a signal that the hold was completely empty. Then they move on to the next step, eating the inedible. Sailors would cut off leather belts, shoes, and scabbards, boiling them for hours in seawater to extract any semblance of gelatin. It was an agonizing meal that only temporarily tricked the stomach, but provided the psychological sensation of eating. And this isn't fiction. Antonio Pigafetta, the chronicler of Magellan's expedition, wrote in 1521, "We ate ox hides that covered the main yard. We soaked them in the sea for 4 or 5 days, and then placed them for a few moments on top of the embers, and so ate them." This is a documented survival practice. The ship's carpenter watches this with a special kind of horror. He sees the crew literally devouring his work. Leather gaskets from the masts, the wrapping on the helm. For him, this isn't just hunger. It's the destruction of the ship, their only chance of salvation. He watches as they cut out grease-soaked pieces of leather that he himself had hammered between the hull planks for waterproofing. Every piece eaten is a new leak. The crew devours the ship, and the ocean begins to devour them in return. It is a slow, mutual suicide. And now, the finale. The last resource before the final line is crossed. Candles. We're talking about tallow candles made from beef or mutton fat. They were the last man-made edible item on board. The crew gnaws on these greasy stubs in complete darkness. Burning them for light is now an unaffordable luxury. By consuming them, the crew was literally eating their last source of light. It is a symbolic act. When the last candle is eaten, the ship plunges into absolute darkness. And it is in this darkness that the most terrible thoughts are born. But these thoughts were not chaotic. They obeyed a cruel, unwritten law, the protocol of the last taboo. It is called the custom of the sea. This is not a pirate law. It is a universal algorithm for survival at sea that turned the chaos of a hunger-fueled mutiny into an orderly procedure. It didn't make the killing right. It made it legitimate in the eyes of those who remained alive. The procedure was sacred. Lots were drawn using short and long straws or a marked coin. This created the illusion of fairness, of the will of fate. It absolved the survivors of direct guilt for the choice. To further dilute the guilt, sometimes the lot would choose not only the victim but also the executioner. Thus, no one was a murderer by their own choice. All were merely instruments of fate expressed through a straw. It was a psychological defense against the reality of killing a comrade. The idea of a fair lottery was often just a cover. The victim was usually the youngest, the cabin boy, or a passenger, not part of the brotherhood, or an injured man who was already a burden. Social and physical weakness seemed to shorten your straw in advance. There was another unspoken rule as well. The person who first proposed resorting to cannibalism often became the first victim. This was a brutal deterrent, forcing everyone to remain silent until the very last moment. How often did this happen? Historians have confirmed dozens of cases, but the real number is likely many times higher. Many survivors simply kept silent. It was a well-known emergency protocol. Historian A.W. Brian Simpson, in his book Cannibalism and the Common Law, studied this issue exhaustively. The custom of the sea was like a lifeboat with a hole in it. No one wanted to use it, but everyone knew where it was. It was a doomsday protocol, locked in the mental safe of every sailor. A complete silence falls over the deck, broken only by the creaking of the masts and the dry, rasping sound of dehydrated breaths. You can hear trembling fingers touching the straws. And then, the short straw is revealed. At that moment, something terrifying happens. The gazes of his comrades change. Respect, friendship, pity, all vanish. All that remains is the gaze of a butcher sizing up a carcass. The man has just ceased to be a person. He has become a resource. The blood was collected first. It was drunk to combat dehydration. Then the organs were eaten. The liver and heart were the most nutritious parts. This was not a feast. It was a methodical butchering of a carcass with the efficiency of hunters. Anthropologists call this survival cannibalism. Its goal, maximum utilization of the resource. The most gruesome part was yet to come. The remaining flesh was cut into strips and salted in the same barrels, using the same methods as regular salt beef. The circle was complete. A man had literally taken the place of an animal in the ship's food chain. When they were found, rescuers witnessed a scene from a nightmare. Not joyful survivors, but half-mad ghosts with empty eyes, next to the remains of a comrade. This image is immortalized by Theodore Géricault in his Raft of the Medusa. The survivors often made no attempt to hide anything. In one known case, a rescue ship's captain, seeing bones on the deck, asked, "My God, what have you done?" One of the sailors calmly replied, "It was the custom of the sea, sir." No remorse, only a cold statement of protocol. In court, they were most often acquitted. The law reluctantly recognized extreme necessity as a mitigating circumstance, but society did not forgive them. They were forever outcasts, branded as cannibals. Their stories were told in whispers in port taverns. It was not until 1884 that the case of R.V. Dudley and Stevens settled the matter, ruling that necessity does not justify murder. But before that, a different fate awaited the survivors. Their tragedy was turned into a commodity. In the ports, cheap, sensational pamphlets were sold, telling the true stories of their survival. Their worst nightmare became public entertainment. So let's trace this path one more time, step by step. First, the illusion of normality, eating rotten salt beef and worm-infested biscuits. Second, the inhuman diet, hunting rats, boiling leather, and eating tallow candles. Third, the ritualization of horror, using the custom of the sea and drawing lots to select a victim. And fourth, psychological defense, turning a comrade into a soulless resource to preserve one's own sanity. In essence, we have witnessed not a spontaneous descent into savagery, but a carefully constructed four-step protocol of dehumanization. Each step down this ladder made the next, even more horrific step psychologically possible. And this brings us to the ultimate paradox. Pirates crossed the final line of humanity by using the most human of tools, the creation of rules and procedures. They did not abandon civilization. They created their own miniature and monstrous civilization where murder was legalized. The philosopher Thomas Hobbes believed that without laws, the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Perhaps the custom of the sea is the very law that is born when all other laws are drowned in the ocean. So what was it? A horrifying but logical survival protocol dictated by extreme hunger? Or was it the ultimate expression of piratical cruelty, where the strong devour the weak under the cover of a lottery? Write just one word in the comments, protocol or cruelty. Let's see which one wins. Your verdict.